Councillor Fiona Baker. Or we just, hang on a minute. We're just trying to sort out the technology, I think. Oh. Is that all right now? Good. Did I get the apologies right?
Yes, we do have a couple of additional ones. So also apologies for non-attendance from Lee Hughes and Eliza Hollis. And we have Catherine White, who's substituting for Hayley Walker.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. Item 2. Oh,
sorry, Chair. And just to highlight that Louise Samways has joined Schools Forum as an Academy representative, and Louise is Chair of Governors at Caroline Chisholm Education Trust.
Okay, thank you. Item 2 is declaration of interest. You've all put the declarations in, but has anybody got anything to add that's not on the, you've not put in? No, good. Item 3, I hand over to you.
Thank you. So, yeah, we've taken the view that as this is the first forum meeting of the new municipal year, to invite the forum to agree the chair and vice chair for 22-23 at this meeting. It cut short the previous terms in the sense that the chair was appointed in last July and the vice chair, I think the meeting after that. But in terms of bringing things back into order, it seemed appropriate to deal with that business at this meeting. So both of the previous chair, Peter French, has indicated he would be willing to continue. So if I could invite the forum to, is there a proposal and a seconder for a chair for the year ahead? And is that seconded? And are there any other nominations? I'm seeing none. In which case,
thank you very much. Thank you. And we now do the same with the vice chair. Paul has indicated that he's willing to stand. I'm happy to propose him from the chair. Is there a seconder? Lovely. Thank you. Does anybody else want to have a go at vice chair? Looks like you're in then. Yeah. Good. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll do our best to move the meetings along. Minutes of the meeting from January. Can we approve these as a true and accurate record? I take silence for assent, so we are approving them. Now I have to ask forum's permission to move item 10 to now, so that Colin can do his presentation on PFI tenders, because he has somewhere else to be. Is that all right with everybody? Lovely, excellent. So I'm very pleased to introduce Colin to present to us around the PFI tender.
Afternoon, everyone. Should I share my presentation, or was there another presentation that I'm talking to?
Yes, please share yours on screen. Yes, please, Colin, if you could share your slides.
Okay, will do.
Thank you.
2 seconds. So can we all see that?
Yep.
It's perhaps worth me just introducing why I've asked you to speak today at Schools Forum, Colin. We've just recently had some changes and some bills go out to schools. And as a result of that, we're getting a lot of queries, and I thought it would be useful to give the background to schools to see why there's been that change in the PFI bill that they're receiving. And just to give a bit of background generally, because I don't think we've looked at PFI for a couple of years. I think 2020 was the last time we brought a presentation to Schools Forum. So that was the reason for bringing this.
Beth. So, a bit of background to this. When into the PFI contract, it was acknowledged by both the schools and councils that the cost of FM services would be dramatically different to what schools had previously funded on their existing budgets, due to both the commitments that the council was making to the contractor for the range of different services that it requires the contractor to provide. Also, secondly, that it ensured that all schools were provided with the same level of service across the piece. And to in effect, you could argue that some schools were using their budgets not for FM services and providing a kind of bronze level of FM service, whereas kind of what we were expecting from the contractor was a silver gold level service. And to that effect, that increased the cost of FM services that the contractor can provide to us. Recognising this, it was agreed that the difference between what the actual cost of FM services were and the income we would see from schools will be funded by both DSG's general revenue from the council. The way that the FM services charge was split between different schools was based on a percentage calculation of their previous existing FM costs and floor areas and various other formulas, which came up with a percentage weighting of what each school would then be invoiced, with charges be recharged to meet the overall cost of FM services. And at that time, it was recognised that some of those cost differences would be met by DSG. So, as a general kind of overview of what that looked like in year one of the FM costs, which is circa 9,300,000, split down in terms of the different areas of that FM charge. You can see here that the FM cost, which includes things like soft services and hard services, so that includes things like grounds maintenance, caretaking, porterage, waste management, statutory compliance, etc., There's roughly 5.3 million of the over 9.3 million. But within that, there was also the life cycle charge aspect, which was roughly about 2.4 million at the time, plus insurance, which was roughly about 1 million, and then there's a cost of managing the project that the contractor, or in this case the subcontractor, Amy, would apply to provide those services across all schools. So what you can see there is a breakdown of that original kind of year one cost, which kind of evidences that the majority of the cost is around maintenance and FM services. Obviously, things have changed since then, and indexation has massively increased the cost of a year one 205 costs. So, as an example, in 2021-22, the FM charges have gone from what were £9.3 million to £16.1 million, and what you can see here is effectively kind of how that £16 million has been met by different funding income. So roughly £8 million was recharged to schools for FM services. Circa £4 million was by DSG contribution, and circa another £4 million was contributed by the authority. So in essence, between DSG and local authority revenue, the services were more than half being met the £380,000 baseline benchmark costs, additional to their recharge costs, and then applied the 8.34 contribution. It should be noted though that the schools that have undertaken or received extensions, wave 1 and wave 2 extensions, that FM charge or the cost of those FM services is also funded by DSG. So that's additional DSG that the school will receive. Schools are not paying themselves for those FM charges.
Can I just jump in there, just to make clear that those are the life cycle costs which we're wrapping up within the terminology FM charges, but the portion that the DSG grant pays for is the life cycle cost of the PFI.
End representation.
Thank you very much. As a bear of little brain, it took me a while to work out that FM meant facilities management, but I got there in the end. Any questions on the report? Yes, please.
Please, Chair. Just really a comment to start with that I think this is the first time that we're able to see that presentation. And I think given the level of cost that we're talking about and the impact on schools, you know, is it possible? I know we can't, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but ultimately from my perspective, representing maintained schools, it would have been useful to have that presentation in advance to be able to review that, to come with questions, because the questions, I'm a representative of that sector, and therefore I'd have liked to give colleagues the opportunity to be able to pass those questions through to ask it at forum. So I think it's just worth noting that I think in future that would be really beneficial to all.
I think that's a very good point that was made by my colleague next to me as well. And my understanding is this is not for a decision, it's just for information, but I do take your point. And maybe we could come back at the next meeting to, people will be willing to answer any questions at the next meeting people have?
Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
And if it's okay, am I okay to continue? Because I think there's a few points. So as I said, as a representative of maintained primaries, following the information that's been shared regarding the cost increase to schools, I've had a relatively short amount of time to be able to gather their thoughts. I think the first thing really to note, or I'd like noted, is the time frame in which we're working. Schools were only made aware of this over the last week. And as schools are setting, or maintained schools are setting their budgets long before this, to then be informed of an average cost between £22,000 and £23,000, that's a significant impact on school budget. And therefore, I know that there are colleagues and school business managers in particular that are, you know, they're in a really difficult position at this moment in time because they're being asked to find this amount of money. So I think, you know, it's worth noting that, you know, there has been a significant amount of pressure applied to schools to ultimately have to find this money that they hadn't perhaps potentially factored in within their budgets several months ago. So I think that would be just the first point that I'd like to make is, I don't know if anybody wants to feedback on that, given that the time frame and ultimately how potentially colleagues could be supported around that.
I think both of those points are related. The reason we've asked Colin to come and explain the charges is because of the number of queries we've had from schools this week about it. So that's partly the sort of speed with which Colin's put this together for us to explain it. And I'm guessing I'm going to let Colin sort of talk about the process, but given that it's been since 2005 that the last benchmarking process happened, because of the work done to try and avoid it, I'm assuming that level of work continues right up to the wire until you know, Colin's team in the Place Directorate work very hard to avoid it. So I'm assuming that the work was done until quite recently to try and avoid it. But I'll let Colin explain the process.
You have a further question?
Yeah, am I okay to keep going?
Yeah.
Because I do think it's, you know, it's ultimately my responsibility to convey the thoughts and you know, what is being communicated across colleagues. And I think, you know, I accept that there has been a significant reduction from the 1.1 million down to the 380. So I think obviously a substantial amount of work quite clearly has taken place to achieve that. But ultimately it does put us in a position in terms of looking at shop floor. You know, some of our schools have said that average of £22,000 to £23,000 is going to make a significant difference in terms of our school's ability to be able to meet the needs of the children, particularly around that quality of education piece. So although I absolutely accept that there are other services, I just really want to highlight the potential impact that this is going to have on some schools. And I think it's really important that that's noted. You know, one school that has responded to me, and again, timeline obviously being very difficult, was an increase up to 90,000. And that's a significant amount of money to have to find out of their budget to ultimately have to then cover this cost. So if you look at that on a practical level, how many members of staff that is, what's the impact on children? And ultimately that's why we're all here, isn't it? To support the lives of the young people. So ultimately what has happened is happened. We're going to have to cover these costs. There is no way of getting around that. But I do think it's important that we know what the impact is on each school. And potentially, again, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Could this been perhaps implemented in a slightly different way? So could it have been implemented over a period of time, and therefore it wasn't just all of a sudden, you know, a sudden bill for £22,000, for example, or up to £90,000. So I think it's just perhaps the delivery model in which it's been presented to schools perhaps could have been considered, and then how it was implemented to schools, or how schools could have responded to that.
Chris, did you want to come in?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I want to address some of those points. I think they're very fair. We did spend a lot of time as officers looking at this and the implications for schools. And we are putting £350,000 using general fund money. I think it's 350, isn't it? 350,000 this year, next year. Well, in fact, going forward through the rest of the PFI, we're putting money into it. Now, I do appreciate the point that's being made about the effect on schools, particularly with high inflation and high school cost inflation. I think what I'm going to propose is we will go back and look at the forthcoming years. And if there's any imaginative ways of dealing with what was a government long ball crisis, really, we've got to remember this was, this all originated with the Channel Tunnel, where Gordon Brown swore that they wouldn't use public money in the same way ever again, and they would keep it off the balance sheet. So this whole PFI deal with the private sector was based on keeping government debt artificially low and having the debt paid over 25 years, including very expensive maintenance contracts, which could not possibly be afforded by the schools who benefit from it. And therefore it had to be spread. I think it's the government, local authorities, and all of the schools in the areas where there are PFIs that all bear the cost. I think after this meeting, because of the relationship we've got with Schools Forum, we will have to go back and look at this again. We are paying this money, in fact, out of council's capital grant at the moment, and that means there's less money available for our capital schemes, of course, because all this has to come from somewhere. So the general fund is under strain. We have to appreciate that schools' budgets are under considerable strain, and we will go back, I think with Simon Bowers, we'll go back and start a series of discussions about what we're going to do going forward from the 2023-24 financial year, because that will leave another 6 years, won't it? Of the PF, they're 25-year PFIs, aren't they? So, 32. No, it's longer. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, we've been in this for a long time, but there's still quite a long time to go for schools. And I do appreciate the points that are made, particularly at the moment. So, you know, I'll put it on record. We will go back and convene an officer group to look at this again.
Sorry, could I just ask a question? I might have missed it in the presentation, but said some of the expenditure was for extensions. So I'm assuming that everything that can be capitalised has been, and that reduced charge would be passed on rather than the full amount?
I think that's a
Paul wants to come in.
Hi, if I could ask, hello Colin, if I could ask a couple of questions we have in our Trust PFI school. In relation to the costs and the cost increases, how much money have we been able to claw back through non-performance on the contract? Because we know that, and I know, Colin, you're monitoring all of the contracts and looking at the performance, but we know there's significant non-performance at certain times in certain areas. So for instance, in our school, we didn't have a caretaker for months. Now, we never saw any money coming back. So hopefully that's come back into the pot, if you like, which will offset some of these costs. And also anyone who's got PFI schools, we know there's always a delay, usually about a year, in life cycle replacement. So things don't happen when they should happen. And so presumably that should be generating some kind of savings against the contractual position. So I was just wondering, Colin, if you got any kind of numbers on the amount of clawback that you have been getting on the contract over the last year or two, which hopefully is helping offset.
Yeah, I think it's worth kind of setting this in context for the answer. That obviously the premise should be that the contractor is performing and we don't receive back deductions to the level of the capital. Because otherwise, what we're doing is setting the standard that it's acceptable that the contractor doesn't perform, and therefore we will receive deductions back. But clearly, what we want to achieve for all schools is that the contractor is performing, and therefore deductions are in. But there will be, in the course of the contract, clearly deductions. So last year, the deductions that we received back was lower than, slightly lower than what we received in terms of additional cost of benchmarking. So that's hence my point around the fact that we've been able to absorb the majority of the 380,000 from last year. So that's the kind of the essence of the kind of deductions for last year. And obviously prior to
I saw you moving your finger. Did you want to come back in?
No, that's fine for the moment. So the savings, the performance savings were around about 380,000.
yeah, they're not performance savings, they're not savings, they're performance deductions.
Yes, yeah.
And they are
Thank you.
Any further questions? I just have one on following up from that, really. Not some. You talked about the FM being the gold standard service, and I just wondered how you monitored that to ensure that it was a gold standard service, or indeed, if you're having clawbacks, how you monitor to ensure that happens.
So it would be fair to say that if you compared what Westfield Council does in terms of managing this contract compared to what happens in other local authorities, it is a higher level of service resource that's been put into the contract management. But we think that kind of provides schools with the level of confidence that the authority is taking the contract seriously and is seeking to drive the contract in a position whereby it is performing. But we recognise that there has been a number of years, particularly recently, where the contract hasn't. But we will, we continue to work with the contractor and the schools to get them to that position.
Thank you very much. So I think we need to come back to this, given what Chris has said and given the comments around the fact that the paperwork wasn't out beforehand. So can we revisit this either next meeting or the meeting after?
Yeah, I think, yeah, we can look at the work plan, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that will be useful.
Sorry, Joe, I guess the only real consideration is around some of the earlier agenda points that are going to be around top slicing and so on, and the money at the moment that is preventing us going to training services and so on. Obviously, at the moment, I'll give you an example. I'll give a practical example of my school where we're obviously £22,000, and then plus the additional £23,000 all in 1 year. So I guess the question is going to rise in terms of whether we move forward with that top slicing, for instance, say it's difficult to in order how to address that by schools as well. So I guess
Yeah, if you'd rather bring it in July as sort of part of a conversation of starting the budget process. Yeah. Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah, so we're highly aware of the contribution that the Schools Forum has agreed, and it did it actually amicably, and recognising the issue that it's fairer to charge schools through a mechanism like this for services rather than the local authority seeking the 0.5%. It doesn't give schools anything. In effect, it's just to help the authority out. Now, if we weren't to get the 2.2 million, we would go for the 0.5% anyway, because we can do that. And if there's a dispute, the DfE is reasonably friendly towards local authority. But I do accept the principle of this. If we expect Schools Forum to help us, we have to, do as much as we can to reduce the de-delegations from schools' budgets and the top slices, disaggregations from all the schools' budgets. There have been one or two unfavourable comments about the diminution in the AWPU of secondary schools this year following the agreement to fund the 2.2 million. And I've taken some of those phone calls myself. I've said exactly why this is and why I believe it's in the system's interest as a whole. Because of course, if schools didn't do that, a school that had a diminution in its AWPU might find a far greater cost in a single year through having to pay for services. Moreover, those services would have been diminished because if you move to trading, there's a certain proportion of schools who will never buy back in. You've got to have a whole bureaucracy for charging. And I personally didn't make any bones about it. We're not going to make any sort of bluff with this. If Schools Forum didn't do it, we weren't going to move from trading this year because it would be too soon anyway. So we were just using your goodwill and we won't abuse it. So we will go away and look at this pretty carefully.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think you need to leave us, Colin. So thank you very much for your time and coming in. Thank you. Okay. I should have said at the start of the agenda that actually we have all the items today are for updates and for information. We don't, apart from the election of chair and vice chair, there's no formal decisions that we need to make today. Always a good thing. So our next, we're going to go back now to item 6, which is the overview of the dedicated schools grant. And Emily is going to lead us with this.
Yep. So we thought it'd be a good opportunity, with it being sort of the opening Schools Forum of the year, to do an overview of the dedicated schools grant. So I don't think we've done it at Forum, certainly since we've been West Northamptonshire Council. And I'm sure it probably would have been a number of years prior to that in Northamptonshire County Council that something like this might have been done. So this is sort of a presentation that we've shared with the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and also with our Chief Executive and Finance Director as well. So we've adapted it slightly for Schools Forum. So I'll kick off then with the first slide, and I'm happy to sort of take questions as we go through, rather than sort of saving them up till the end if anyone's got any questions. So as most people know, the Dedicated Schools Grant, or the DSG, is a ring-fence specific grant that's allocated to the local authority by the government to support a range of education related services. The majority of the DSG is allocated and paid to education providers based on a national formula which funds direct education provision. So this includes schools, local authority maintained schools and academies, early years providers, and high needs education and further education, so 16 to 25. The remaining sort of 10% is paid to nurseries and schools and higher education institutions for pupils and students with special educational needs and disabilities, so often referred to as high needs top-ups. Funding to cover in-year increases in pupil and student numbers, which is referred to as growth funding, and maintained school dedelegations, which is what we referred to in the previous item around funding of top slice from maintained schools, individual schools budgets, at the approval of Schools Forum, and these are managed centrally by the local authority. And also there's an element that's retained by the local authority for funding historic and ongoing commitments. So the DSG, we need to deploy it in accordance with the conditions of the grant and the latest early years finance regulations. So there's detailed guidance that's published on an annual basis for each block, and it's contained within various operational documents that are issued by the SFA, and Will's nodding his head at me. So moving on to the next slide then. As you may know, the DSG, we've got a 4-block funding model. So we've got the schools block, the high needs block, early years block, and the central school services block. The total DSG that the authority receives is largely based on schools, pupil and children numbers as per census data, whether sort of maintained or academy. But each of the 4 blocks is allocated on a different basis, and that's set out on the following slides. But just picking up on a couple of points within the bullets on that 3rd slide. We're sort of post a year now into sort of post LGR and vesting day, and splitting Northamptonshire County Council into North and West. The disaggregation was largely driven by the formula, really. So the disaggregation replicated the national formulae that's used by the DFE for each North and West unitary. So we obviously did work closely with the ESFA on that split, and the sort of proportion for West Northamptonshire Council equated to approximately 55% of the former county council allocation. So the schools block then, by far the largest block, so the vast majority of the funding in the schools block is allocated to the local authority, driven by pupil numbers, with the primary unit of funding and the secondary unit of funding applied. And it's allocated to schools for sort of day-to-day spending in their individual schools budgets through the schools funding formula. Also sort of within the schools block, we've got dedelegations, which we obviously consult on an annual basis and vote upon at Schools Forum. So this is where Maintain members of Schools Forum can decide on behalf of all Maintain schools to de-delegate funding for the authority to provide services to all maintained schools. So funding can't be de-delegated from academies, but they can choose to sort of buy into these services from the authority or an alternative provider. As far as possible, we'll aim to mirror the national funding formula, and the individual schools' budgets for academies and funding for high needs places as academies are paid to academies directly by the ESFA. Which reflects the shift in responsibility for the funding of academies. So this is taken off of our DSG allocation before the grant is paid to the local authorities, and often that's termed recoupment. So academies, as you know, are independent of the local authority and accountable directly to the DFE. The DFE is the agency responsible for all schools related funding, and it's the education and skills funding agency within that. So Maintain schools continue to receive their funding directly from the council after that recoupment. Moving on to the high needs block then. So this is allocated based on proxy indicators, so population, deprivation, ill health, disability, prior attainment, along with special school pupils from the autumn census, hospital and outreach, and free special schools. So the high needs block funds places in special schools, resource units and alternative provision, and also top up funding for pupils with education, health and care plans in all settings, which includes academies, independent special schools and further education colleges. Within the high needs budget, we also budget for contributions to a range of statutory services that are provided by the local authority, which are for the benefit of all schools and academies. So this includes the sensory impairment provision, virtual school, educational entitlement team, for example. So the remaining contribution to these central services comes from the West Northamptonshire Council General Fund. The early years block, so this is allocated to the local authority based on early years censuses. So in pre-COVID funding years, it was based on the January before and during the financial year, but during COVID, this switched to termly censuses to drive the local authority funding. I need to look to Beth here to sort of remind, it's gone back to using the January census data. So this funds free entitlement for all early year settings for 2, 3 and 4 year olds, with the local authority required to passport a statutory minimum of 95% of the 3 and 4 year old funding to schools, private, voluntary and independent early years education providers through the early years single funding formula. The remaining 5%, which is annually approved through Schools Forum, can be used to fund local authority central functions to manage and administer the early years arrangements. So the funding is demand-led. Early years settings submit claims based on the number of hours children they have attend, and the local authority must pay these settings what they're entitled to through the formula. And moving on to the final block, the central school services block. So approximately 42% of this funding is allocated to the local authority based on census data, and the remaining 58% is historically based, and that historical element is being unwound by central government, and it's reducing at a rate of 20% each year. So if people remember, think back to the consultation last year and the vote in December, where we're seeing that historical reduction, which equates to about £500,000 a year. The local authority general fund has had to pick up those costs, so it's obviously at the cost of other services council-wide, so it is more sort of cost shunting really. There will be a sort of minimum floor to which the reduction will stop, and I think we'll reach that floor probably in the next 2 to 3 years, where we won't see any further reductions. So that's the four block model. Moving on then to just a bit of an overview of schools forum. Obviously we're all here, and membership is made up of representatives from maintained academy, primary and secondary schools, nursery, and council officers. The meetings are open to the public and are held approximately every 2 to 3 months. So forum's got a statutory role in ensuring that school funding across the county is equitable and fair by considering proposals put forward by the local authority for areas such as the funding formula and central expenditure from the DSG. So usually we'll look at consulting with Schools Forum on an annual basis as part of the budget setting process. And we'll do that in accordance with the legislation and guidelines as issued by the ESFA. There's also sort of the requirement to consult with Schools Forum on changes to formula funding, and Forum has the authorisation for central expenditure budgets for sort of the ongoing commitments and movements of funding between blocks and the growth fund policy. So on the next slide, we sort of summarised the annual cycle really, and the main items that we'll look to be covering at the meetings. And then the slide after that obviously shows the Schools Forum powers and responsibilities, and that's sort of just taken straight from the ESFA guidance. Okay, so I've just got a few slides here then on the sort of forecast outturn position. We're still working on the provisional outturn, which is an agenda item later on. So what we have is the forecast outturn that was last presented to January Schools Forum. So it shows an overspend of 2.9 million, which hopefully people will be familiar with, which is largely driven by pressures on the high needs block. And obviously, again, linked to a future sort of agenda item. These are expected to continue into future years and presents risks around affordability of provision for pupils with high needs, sort of if we don't do anything differently. We've also just included some information on the DSG settlement for 22-23, which we've covered in sort of previous schools forums. And the slide sort of with the numbers there shows the increases of funding, which includes supplementary funding for mainstream schools as well. I'm not sure yet if we've had the published figures for on a school by school basis, so we're still awaiting that information. But for the mainstream schools, that will be passported from the local authority, and presumably the ESFA will be paying academies directly for their share of the supplementary funding. Okay. Yep. I think it was supposed to be probably in Q1 sometime, but great. Okay. Right, so moving on then to issues. Complementary education places between North Northants and West Northants. This is an issue sort of purely linked to disaggregation, really, and around sort of funding agreements. I don't know, Chris, if sort of you wanted to say anything on this, or yeah, okay, that's fine. Yes, yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. And obviously we've got in issues high needs sufficiency and the capital investment required, which is sort of part of Chris's item as well in the high needs block recovery plan. Early years and the maintained nursery schools, which is another agenda item that we've got. And then just sort of the additional disaggregation around services that are led or hosted in Northamptonshire. There's still work to do to sort of disaggregate those further. And then obviously we've got the issue of schools PFI as well, which we'll bring back to the July Schools Forum. Final slides then are just sort of information around schools funding. So we've just got a breakdown there of the budget share broken down by school type and sort of academy maintained. And we've got some information about the school balances, but that's as at 31st of March 2021. So we're still currently pulling together the school balances information as at year end just gone. But you can see at the end of March last year, there was a total of just under 9.9 million across the maintained schools, roughly split 50-50 between uncommitted and committed. And at that point, 4 schools were in deficit, comprising of a total deficit value of just under £200,000, which is sort of broadly in line with the number of schools in the prior year, so at the end of March 2020, but the value had increased. So as I say, I think the intention is to present the school balances as at the end of March this year to the July Schools Forum, but the sort of BEFS team are currently in the process of pulling that information together.
The notional allocations for each school should be coming in July. School supplementary grant should be coming very shortly.
Thank you, that's helpful. Are you?
There was just one more slide on sort of grant funding, but other than what it says there, I've sort of got nothing more really to add than what's on that slide. So really just if there's any other questions anyone may have.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think that's a very helpful overview for us as forum. So thank you very much. Any questions from anybody? I have one. So I appreciate that schools funding is related to the people numbers and the census day and that sort of thing. So a number of our schools now in West Northants are having Ukrainian refugees coming into the schools. So is there either locally or nationally funding that follows them? I'm just particularly aware that schools there are, they often don't have any English, and it's taking a lot from schools' budgets to sort it out. So I just wondered if there was anything.
Beth and I were just talking about this before forum started, because there's sort of a chain of emails that sort of go around our networks. So I might need to rely on Beth to step in here where I get it wrong. But I think the funding, that there's sort of two routes for entry, I think for Ukrainian families, and I think we only get funding if they come in via one route, and I can't remember now which route it is.
There's no funding attached to the family route, apparently. One of the routes is called the Ukrainian family route. And the response that we've had from the SFA that's going around our M4 group is that we could fund it from our growth fund. So it's something I was going to talk perhaps at next forum, whether we need to make an addendum to our growth funding policy if we want to do that.
I think that would be helpful. I think what would be useful is if we could get, if we haven't done so already, if there is funding with the Homes for Ukrainian scheme, which is the other one, I think, if there is funding allied to that, that schools are aware of that they can pick up the funding. So perhaps if we, maybe they are, but perhaps if we can make sure they are.
Maybe we could ask Will if you have any more information.
That's helpful. I'm just schools, I've had some really good messages from schools about how welcoming schools and children have been, but it is a challenge when you've got a Ukrainian child that simply doesn't speak any English at all.
I think last time we had an update on that, I think they were looking at replicating something similar to the Afghan resettlement scheme. For that stream, but as I know, sort of still furiously working through the detail of that and what that might look like.
I don't want to labour the point, but the difference is that we've got Ukrainian refugees sitting in some villages in West Northamptonshire with schools that are just not used to having children that can't, English is not their first language in those villages. So.
Just to say, quite a significant proportion have got reasonable English. I was at Wootton school today, and they've taken 4. 2 have got very good English. 1 has got some functional English, and 1 has got poor English. So, I mean, if you look at the television, surprising numbers of Ukrainians do have sort of serviceable.
I think it's a variety, and,
it is.
Children do pick it up very quickly, of course, but it is still a challenge for schools when they're dealing with everything else as well. That's all I'm putting out there, really.
It looks like there will be money. The thing is, we're having to place pupils into school through our admissions service without any guarantees. That's the issue at the moment.
And I think what we're asking is, I'm asking, and hope Forum agrees with me, is just for both sides to follow this up, to see if we can make sure that money is put in for those children.
And could that also include sort of well-being, pastoral support, given everything that they've been through?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Any more questions on that one? No.
I just add, you mentioned the Afghan scheme. There was also the Syrian one before in Birmingham. We took in quite a lot of Syrian refugees and had into our schools and had a significant amount of top-up funding for that in, I think it was 2016, somewhere around there. But and it's all very helpful to help them integrate and to provide the extra support they need. But I'm sure your policy colleagues will be looking at that and how to get that money passported out before the census. No.
Thank you. We'll move on now to agenda item number 7, which is the High Needs Block Deficit Recovery Plan, and Chris is going to give us an update.
Yeah, I'll take you through it quickly. This is the report the Schools Forum asked for because you're contributing to the High Needs Block through the disapplication for the specialist services. So what I've got to report is we are on track for most of the activity. I don't want to take you through the action plan in detail, but just looking at the structural overspend, it's just over 2.5 million. which means that reoccurs every year, and we have to underspend by more than that in order to recover the high needs block. It is very unstable, or it's unstable here, but we're managing it better than most other areas. While there are 8 elements in the high needs block recovery plan, there are really 2 elements of that that are key in their importance. And probably 2 others that will make the system work better, but may not generate any savings. The one that may not generate any savings is what's called the ordinarily available in schools work. And in West Northamptonshire, we do have a problem with the quality control in all our schools. All systems have this, but we've got too many schools where the quality of understanding what should be ordinarily available in a school without any extra support from the high needs block or outside that, it's not even. So while an ideal quality gap between the schools that are best, the schools that would be worse, be that much, here it's kind of this much. And so we've seconded 3 Senkos to work with all our schools in order to help them understand what should be ordinarily available. This is within the ordinary delegated resources, and of course the additional resources that the government has provided since 2013. So it may result in savings, but that's not the main reason we're doing that work. And if I just take you through to page 2 of the report, and the tasks and the RAG ratings, ordinarily available is amber. We're doing it, but we haven't completed the work yet, and we need to go through all of the schools with the Senkos. They're going to be seconded from now until the end of the calendar year, end of December. The second area, task 2, resource places in mainstream schools. This is green because this programme is going extraordinarily well. Schools have been extremely cooperative. We've got 250 places. We will put those in place incredibly quickly. From May, June this year, we should generate all of the places, not for all the pupils, because they will fill up over time. We hope they'll fill up quite quickly, but obviously it's not immediate. And we should have all of those in place and up and running by September 2023. In terms of the funding for that, we have the funding. It's all in place through basic need, and I'll come on to the lack in basic need in a moment, but we're taking all of those programmes through the council's cabinet more or less as we speak. We've got programmes going to each cabinet. The schools are being informed about the build programmes where necessary, and I'd say marks out of 10, 8 or 8.5 out of 10 for the way that's going. It's really pleasing. The level of cooperation from our schools about resource provision has been absolutely brilliant. So that's the second task. The third task is the new free special school. So this is amber at the moment, and I will take you through that in a bit of detail. Most of you will have seen, we started the consultation for the new free special school, 250 places, and we want to try to open the special school certainly by early in 2024 if we can, with the procurement stage starting in the middle of June and ending mid-late July. So at the moment we're consulting everybody. I've already had a considerable number of trusts indicate an interest in running the special school. The reason it's amber is the special school could cost up to 20 million. We can't wait for the government's free school programme. In the white paper, the government did announce a really big free schools programme, including special free schools. But looking at that, it might be 2 years before the money becomes available. And my experience, excuse me, with the ESFA representative, the government is pretty bad on getting these things done quickly. So my estimate is if we waited for that, the school might open in 2029 or 2030 in the end. And that's been with my direct experience in other authorities. We can't wait that long for a new special school. So I've taken it informally to council members, and I've given them the envelope of funding for reasons I can't disclose at the moment. The school could cost a lot less than that, but it's unlikely. So we're working with 20 million. I've seen the council's lead member for finance and the director of finance yesterday, and they've approved in principle this going forward to the council's cabinet. The borrowing requirement, we have, thanks to the government and the ESFA, we have the most generous basic needs settlement we've had in years in Northamptonshire. We've got £13 million over the next few years. And Beth has just told me we might have more money than that, which we need to look at. We need to add into that, I think it's 3.5 million of basic need from the previous year. So it looks like we've got at least 15 million, but that will lead, given the resource provision programme and the specialist programme, a shortfall of about 12 million. The council will have to borrow that money or raid its reserves. The council, so this will go to council's cabinet at the point of procurement, I think. And at that point, we'll have an agreement, and the whole thing will move from amber to kind of amber green. You know, once we've got the go-ahead, and we've got a trust procured. If you talk about my level of confidence at the moment, it's 90% confident this will go ahead. These 500 places, they're absolutely critical, paradoxically enough, to inclusion, because we can't ask our schools to be more inclusive unless we've got really good specialist provision that takes the children of the very highest level of need. At the moment, our special schools are all but one or two, they're all over full. One or two are significantly over full. I think one is 40 pupils over its capacity. They've been amazingly cooperative, but we can't carry on with that. We have 174 pupils at 9 million of cost, at an average cost of nearly £60,000 in independent schools, because we haven't got sufficient space. So for many reasons, the first of which is better provision for pupils. They are better off in state schools than independent schools, nearly all of these pupils, because the independent schools, many of the places are not great places. We're using them as a last resort, not because we lose tribunals, because they offer better education. For that reason, I draw your attention. I'll go now to the spreadsheet that is here, which is completely inadequate for this body, and I acknowledge that. Next time in July, I'll provide you with a completely different spreadsheet. The deficits of this spreadsheet, it just shows cost avoidance. It doesn't show the budget that's available in high needs, and it's insufficiently. It doesn't account for sufficiently the fact that we can save money as well as avoid cost. And I'll tell you the difference between cost saving and cost avoidance. A cost saving is when you're spending 20 grand and you save 10 grand. A cost avoidance is where you're not spending anything at the moment at all, and you would spend 50,000 in an independent school, but would only spend 25,000 in a state special school. So you're spending £25,000 less, but you're still spending £25,000 more than you were, because that pupil wasn't in the system. So that's the difference between the two areas. Now here, you've just got cost avoidance. And I was aware at the weekend, too late for this, that we've done quite a lot of toing and froing on this. And what I've done is developed a more sophisticated spreadsheet that has an estimate of income. And this is critical because actually this year, I didn't know this until Beth told me, the increase in the high needs block has been 12%. We got 8%, which is the bottom, is the baseline of any authority, which isn't particularly generous to us. But then when Beth told me we'd actually got 12%, we've now estimated the increase in every year until 2025, 26, because you can't estimate the deficit unless you think about the income you're getting through budget. So we've done that for the first time. We've estimated 6%. Because the government is recognising there's significant, well, it's in the green paper and the white paper, there's significant strain in the system, and inflation's high, and I think 6% is low. The effect of that, it will increase our budget from about 55 million to 72 million at the period we're looking at. So that makes a significant difference in the forecast outturn. So does the fact that we will have cost savings here, because I believe we will get pupils back from independent schools, because a lot of parents a lot of them are not boarding. They've got long transport journeys, And the parents don't want that. It's no good for the children, and we will provide much closer education. Now, if you're spending at the moment £58,000 and then you're spending £50,000, this is only the high needs block. Because as far as the council's budget is concerned, transport comes out of the general fund. Transport to an independent school averages, I think, 20,000. And we could probably transport the children for £12,000, especially have a new special school where they're all going to one place, and many from Northampton, actually. So we'll make considerable savings outside this block, and that's not cost avoidance. So I've got the spreadsheet that looks at cost avoidance and cost savings, and the pace of us putting pupils into the new provision. Now, we know these provisions are going to fill immediately. We provide them. We know that, but we just don't know from where. We don't know how many will come back from independent schools, and that's a critical thing in terms of the cost saving. So I provided a set of estimates, and what I'll do for the members is provide scenarios from sort of worst case to best case to medium case and show them the effect. But what I can tell you is that on what we're projecting at the moment with the budget, cost avoidance and cost savings, it looks like we can achieve a saving in the high needs block budget by 2025-26. And it looks like a small saving and then a deficit the next year for cash flow and other reasons might occur from 2024-25. So this is much better news. And we will always try to be the most efficient that we can with the high needs block, and make sure that if we do underspend, we think about the best ways of supporting pupils within that block to use money that we don't spend. At the moment, us, like nearly every authority in the country, are not in that position. But believe you me, as a system, if we work together, as well as we have since this council was created, we'll do it. Because I've not seen very often a corporation at the level I've seen here with schools in difficult circumstances. Yeah, we're going to give this a go. 250 places in mainstream schools, resource provision from scratch, is pretty good. And the level of enthusiasm for this is saying, yeah, this is what we need to do, and recognising this comes alongside more inclusion in schools and more ordinarily available within schools' budgets. I think it's a very bright future for our specialist provision here. So those are the things that I'd say in the main. I'm not going to go through the other areas of the tasks. We're doing reasonably well, except one, independent schools. I've scrapped that for the moment. I was proposing that we go out and look at the quality of provision, see what we're getting and what we're spending, and see if they're providing everything that we're paying for. And indeed, everything we're paying for is what we think is good value. I'll give you an example. Some special schools teach sort of life skills through horse riding and confidence building. Now, it's great, but it's kind of Rolls-Royce thing. You wouldn't get that in most state school provisions, and we need to think very carefully about what we're giving pupils in one set of provision against another. Now, we just haven't got the resources to do that at the moment, and it's not our priority, so I've stalled on that. But all the others, we're onto them, and we're making reasonably good progress. So I think that's it from me. Chair, I'll wait for questions.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions on that one? Yes, please.
Right, sorry to be, I may be wrong, it's my first meeting, but I don't understand the what's been talked about in terms of early years. So I've seen on the budget page, it's got a point 15 about ceasing high needs payments to early years block. I don't know what that looks like, what it means, what I'm meant to be representing in terms of, giving opinions on.
So the early years block,
Thank you. Sorry, yes.
Just to say, I think as a special school representative, we're really grateful that we're looking at this. For an example, in the school I'm from, we're 32 students above our numbers, having maximised the space, building in playgrounds, converting meeting rooms to classrooms, still with the challenge of tribunals, and being directed to make places. So it is really welcome. I can see all the work going on. I think there's a missed opportunity that special schools haven't been invited to perhaps look at outreach work and sort of share their expertise. And I know there is an appetite for that. So I'm hoping that will be something that we saw in the future.
So the answer to that is unequivocally yes, but we can't do everything at once. It was an important part of our peer challenge about looking externally at what works well and looking internally. Part of the Senko secondment should be looking at that, how they spread their own expertise and how we use our specialist providers, resource provisions as well as special schools, by the way. We do have quite a lot of outreach, but I would say it's not as systematic as it might be at the moment. So thanks for that, and I will ensure that I take that back.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Just a simple question, Chris, hopefully. Do we know the location of this new free school?
We do. There's one tiny reservation. There may be an alternative bid, but the site that we've identified is the Tiffield site, and it's next to the Gateway School. Slight complication, I'll be open about it. It's owned by a trust. There's a lone trustee who has said that we meet the criteria, that he's satisfied to offer, because it would be a lease, it's not the sale of land. It's a lease for 125 years to an academy trust, but we haven't got it signed and sealed yet. So it will be, we will take it forward, but I've not quite finalised it yet. So if people know the Gateway School, it's a piece of land behind Gateway School.
Thank you. And dealing with land with the Church of England, I do appreciate the difficulties that you have there. Yes.
Chris, just one. I think you partially answered this anyway for me. And that was, you're hoping, I was looking at the savings and the potential from opening the preschool, which you've just articulated very well. You've got savings in 23, 24 on the basis, I presume, of aiming to open partway through the year there. Is that realistic? It
certainly is. These were built January, April.
I appreciate that. I'm talking about the build time.
Oh, build time, yeah. So some of this with the resource, if you're talking about the resource as well, some of the build is quite minor.
Yeah, no, I was talking about the line 5 special school avoidance, 1.5 million.
So the answer is yes and no to that. The answer is, if it's all new build, the answer is no. If there's some capital facility there already, it is possible.
Right.
There might be a variation of bids that might allow that. But I think, if I was to answer your question, I think you're right. It's too optimistic, and that will probably take a little bit longer.
And it's when you're saying bids, you're talking about from when from land you're identifying now, and will procure that, and then it'll either be refurbishment or new build.
Yeah.
Or are you talking about trusts coming to you with, we've got something we can do and put a school in?
So, okay, I don't want to say too much at the moment, but it is both of those. Right. It's trust coming to us. We have an obligation, we have a legal obligation to provide the land and the money unless it's a government program. So we've done that. We are allowed to have variant bids. Somebody can put in a variant bid where they have their own land or whatever. And in this case, that might happen. What I want to say to everybody here is that the sole criteria that can be used for the winning bid is quality. And obviously, because the building will be working with a trust, it's the quality of the provision. Because the DfE, I've had long discussions with the DfE about this, and their point is, okay, there may be a possibility of it costing 7-8 million less in terms of capital, but this school's going to last 50 odd years, and there's 50 years of pupils in there, and the main thing is the quality of education for those pupils. And I get that, and it's quite right. And that is the way that we'll do it. Because we might get a variant bid, I'm looking at whether we get independent adjudication for the bids aside from the council.
And that bidding process starts in June, did you say?
So it's all subject to a bit of change. In the consultation document, I've got all the dates there, and the date where we're starting the procurement process with bids invited is the 15th of June. And I think I'm closing it sometime just towards the end of July. And we hope for quite a quick process, because obviously the Regional Schools Commissioner is a decision maker on free schools. So we hope to be in discussion with the RSC, or whatever it's called now, the regional network, over the summer.
Yeah,
we hope you'll be doing that over the summer.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, so it doesn't look as though it will go to Council's Cabinet on the 14th, because it's not a key decision. We're procuring it. It's a key decision before you award a tender. So it looks like we're still in a bit of a discussion about this actually, but it looks like I have delegated powers to go out to procurement for this, to go out to invite bids. It's all being checked out now. It's certainly been to informal cabinet, which is the weekly meeting the leader holds with the senior officers, and it's all been very warmly received there. No, so we will have informal approval for the budget before it goes out. That I will produce a business case that will be accepted by the lead member. What's not determined is exactly how we're going to repay it. I ought to be open with Schools Forum. We say, well, okay, the school system is going to get benefit from this. Can we recharge Schools Forum as a top slice? And I've said, well, look, the answer is that is legal. Schools Forum can't borrow money, but it can repay money on behalf of the council. The but there is the discussions we've been having here. You're already making a significant contribution. And I said, well, Schools Forum said, yeah, okay, we'll give you a couple of million for that, but we're not paying for that and the specialist services. We're going to explore whether we can use the high needs block as part of the repayment when we move into surplus. And so we're looking legally at that, Beth's going to look at that now. But we will proceed with this in a way that offers maximum benefits to pupils and the school system in West Northamptonshire, because the two are symbiotic. If we do something to help the whole system cope better with special education needs, the outcome for all pupils will be better. The inclusion for pupils with special education needs will be better, because we're making appropriate provision with those of the highest level of need.
Okay. Yes, of course.
The last board meeting, we had that vote on 0.5% or slightly 0.68, and you were waiting a decision on whether that deviation. I don't recall any feedback saying whether it was approved.
Oh, yes, it was. Yes, sorry, it's all in the budgets now.
I didn't see it in paper, when I was looking through the minutes of the last meeting, we were still in limbo with it. So I hadn't appreciated
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite a tough process to go through with the ESFA actually, and it's something we need to be mindful of in future. But the principle of this is so strong. Schools have delegated budgets for this service, and it's right that they pay. It's wrong that it's down to an individual school that might have high levels of need and very constrained budgets. This is a really good way of doing it, but I appreciate we're humble about the fact we may not be able to continue it. That's the fact of it, and we're grateful that Schools Forum has had the sort of communal will to agree it for this year. We could all see how it works, and we appreciate next year might be different. If it is different, I can tell you what I will recommend, because it looks like it won't be me that's here, but I will recommend very strongly that we revert to the 0.5% and that we provide the service in exactly the same way, that we don't recharge the schools, because the services will not survive in the way they are now if we try and trade it. I've seen people try to do it, and you will have a lot of bureaucratic effort, a lot of schools just going somewhere else, saying, okay, we've got to pay for it, let's test it out. And some schools will say, well, we find somebody better, or don't want to say my mate, we've got somebody we know that we've known for years. And generally speaking, I think we've got good services here, and I want them to maintain.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, was there anything else? No. Okay, let's move on, because it's Chris again. Early years and maintain nursery school update.
Okay, so after we really think about this, we brought it back, it was controversial.
Yes.
I think it's been extremely well handled, the maintained nursery schools budgets. The issue that's arisen amounts to this. Some nursery school heads believe that we should offer a bigger supplement than the government allows the council. I will not do that. That would mean taking money from other early year settings that are much less well funded. Therefore, it becomes a matter of funding the nursery schools as equitably as we can within the envelope of funding that they've got. The issue there is historically it wasn't equitable, and therefore one nursery in particular offered extra services and got extra money. This is just to report that we've agreed the other 3 nurseries, because one has 2 nurseries, the other 3 nursery heads of the 5, one being the head of 2 nurseries that are in a federation, very generously said, we recognise it's too difficult for Camrose to accommodate this in 1 year. And therefore we, although some of them have very constrained budgets, will do it over 3 years. What you've got there set out is a 3-year reduction in the Camrose grant that will reduce their subsidy over that period. I have the written agreement of the Camrose head and chair of governors, therefore governing body, for this, and we will not have, as a local authority, any reneging on this deal. It is going to go ahead. The one thing we've looked at is the way we derive the budgets for future years. We've agreed a working party with nursery head teachers that starts this month. It started with backroom work by us, looking at different ways you might do the formula, looking at the outcomes at early years foundation stage, looking particularly at deprivation, because they're very keen on deprivation as a funding model. We'll go to them with scenarios over the next 4 or 5 months. And we'll consult them thoroughly on their views, then the local authority will take a decision about funding going forward next year. So while this might vary at the margins, what I can say is the nursery schools will move together in terms of the funding, the per pupil funding available to them, and won't be me making the decision, it will be my colleagues, because it is a council decision. We will not be using money from elsewhere in the early years block. The nursery school sector, maintained nurseries, must do it within the envelope, which is a very generous envelope thanks to government funding. That's it from me.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Anybody? No? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Emily again now for the provisional DSG and schools 2021-22 outturn.
Yeah, so it's just a quick update to let Schools Forum know that we're still working through the detail of the provisional outturn. As you'd expect, given it's our first year end as a new unitary authority, I think Beth will vouch for the fact that it's been the most complex and challenging year end that we've been going through, trying to unpick things from the legacy council, for which West Northants are the lead on, and also the inter-authority charging between North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire. So we're working through all of that at the moment for both the DSG capital and for the Revenue General Fund. So we'll bring the provisional outturn to the July Schools Forum.
Thank you. And I don't envy you having to deal with all that stuff between the two authorities. It sounds horrendous. Any questions? Thank you. We'll move on to, we've done item 10. So we'll move on to item 11, which is the forward plan. I think this is just for information, but if anybody wants to make a comment on it, they're very welcome to. But they don't. That's lovely. I have received no requests for any other urgent business. And so I will just remind members that the next meeting is the 5th of July. And I'll thank everybody for their attendance. Thank you very much.